Philippa Gregory is perhaps the most preeminent historical novelist writing in England at the moment. And a new Philippa Gregory novel is always an occasion that readers, publishers and indeed the general public wait for. Well, the new book is called The White Queen, and Philippa Gregory is here with me to talk a little bit about this book. Philippa, you've deserted the Tudors, you've gone back in your new novel to the Plantagenets about 50 years earlier. What made you want to go backwards to this other dynasty, the Plantagenets?
Well, I haven't deserted them. I can't ever promise to leave the Tudors. There are certainly Tudor books that I want to come back and do, but I got tremendously interested in the question really of where they came from. The Plantagenets are the family that ruled England before the Tudors. The Tudors, in a sense, usurp the Plantagenet throne. And so I really wanted to know, okay, here you've got Henry VII. He picks up, in legend, he picks up the crown of England from the mud of Bosworth Field and makes himself king. How does that happen? So I, of course, got interested in Henry VII, and that led me to this extraordinary old scandal, which is that Henry VII's wife, who was Elizabeth of York, the princess of the previous ruling house, had in fact married him, but that she had been in love with and had possibly had a fully consummated affair with the previous king, Richard III, and that this has been very powerfully suppressed both by the Tudor historians, of course, who would do that, but also by later historians like the Victorian historians, because it's such a smirch, really, on her reputation.
Well, it's incest.
Well, it's incest as well, you see, which makes it even worse. So, because Richard III was her uncle, and possibly even worse than that, he is the alleged murderer of her brothers, the princes in the Tower. So you then say, so is this founding mother of the House of Tudor a woman so bad that she sleeps with her uncle, who is the murderer of her little brothers? And that made me want to really understand the story of the princes in the Tower. And that led me back to the whole Plantagenet story, really, of which the princes in the Tower is so much a central part.
It leads you, in terms of characters, back to Elizabeth's mother, Elizabeth Woodville, who eventually marries, having resisted him, Edward IV. What was the appeal of Elizabeth Woodville?
Oh, she's just so great. You can't help but love Elizabeth Woodville. Firstly, it's a kind of Cinderella story. She's a commoner, she's a widow, she's poor. She waits on the roadside because she has to get her dowry lands, and the family are in dispute and they won't pay her dowry. If she doesn't get her dowry, she has, in a sense, got no future. Women can't earn a living. She has to have the money that her dead husband's family owe her. So she waits. We don't exactly know where, but we actually believe it is on the side of the road under the Queen's Oak at Grafton in Northamptonshire.
And you can go there.
You can see it. The tree is still there today. And as Edward comes round the bend at the head of his army, because he's on the way to fight the Battle of Hexham, she steps out, he stops, she makes her request, he promises it'll be taken care of, and he rides on. That we know. What is pretty apparent is that he rides back and they become lovers and they marry. They're married within 6 weeks. He then rides off, wins the Battle of Hexham, goes to the council at Reading, and there they're about to ratify the arrangements for his marriage to Princess Bona of Savoy, a relative of the King of France, thereby locking England into an alliance, a European alliance, which is essential for England's safety. And at that really embarrassing moment, he has to look at his mentor and real kind of commander, the Earl of Warwick, called the Kingmaker, because he's just made Edward king, and say to him, I'm married already. Just explosive.
This is really risky business, but it's risky for Elizabeth too, isn't it? Because at this moment, she and her family are propelled right into the court and to the front line of English politics.
What they actually do is really very understandable. They do what a number of families do in this incredible time of danger and change. Lots of families simply change sides. Some families, like the Stanleys, deliberately put a brother on one side and a brother on the other, so you've got this kind of insurance. Whatever happens, someone's going to be in the ruling party. What the Woodvilles simply do is, having been absolute loyal supporters of the House of Lancaster, Elizabeth's father and her brothers had gone out to fight for Lancaster. Her husband died at the Battle of St Albans fighting for Lancaster. Once she's engaged to Edward, everybody just becomes Yorkists and join, in a sense, the York court. And as she and her mother marry their siblings and cousins and every one of the family, their kinsmen and women, into the aristocracy, they form a new ruling power, they form a new family, and they become Edward's courtiers and protectors.
How does Elizabeth, who's been really quite a simple wife to the point where she meets Edward IV, how does Elizabeth adapt to politics so well? Because she proves herself pretty skilled at playing the game.
Well, that's a very interesting question, because on the one hand you have the historians who don't like Elizabeth, who say she's a manipulative, scheming, difficult woman, and that therefore women just do that. That is the nature of women. They're just ghastly, and so she's just ghastly, and she just takes to it like a duck to water. Or you think, as I do, that you're right, she was fundamentally a country woman living prosperously but in a relatively small way. But her mother, Jacquetta, married the squire of her husband when her husband died, but her first husband was the Duke of Bedford. So he was a royal duke. He was running France at the time. When they come back to England, she becomes the second lady in the land because of her own background. She was the daughter of the Count of Luxembourg, and she's of the Duke of Burgundy family. So she's very experienced in the life of the court. She'll know everybody. She knows how the titles work. She knows how the levers of power work. And I think it's her guidance that gets the whole of the family. Elizabeth becomes queen, but the whole of the family move in to become courtiers par excellence in this new kingdom.
If we go back through the family tree, through Elizabeth Woodville, through her mother Jacquetta, eventually way back we get to a river goddess, to Melusina. Now, is Melusina a character that you've invented, or is it a folk story that you've simply borrowed and added your own particular story to?
I retell it, and I think I have every right to retell it, because one of the great joys of a folkloric tale is that it is retold. Also, I have to say, Disney retells it. It is the story of the Little Mermaid. Hans Christian Andersen retells it. There are many, many versions of it. At its grimmest and oldest and most, therefore, scary, it is the story of the woman who lives in the fountain. The knight winds his way through the forest. Out of the water comes this beautiful woman, and she's naked to the waist. He falls in love with her. He proposes marriage. She agrees to become his wife if he will leave her alone for a certain amount of time, say every month. And he agrees to this. They go to the castle. They have beautiful children. They have a wonderful life. They are famously romantic, glamorous, beautiful, happy couple. And he, like a fool, breaks his vow, and he spies on her. In some versions of the legend, she leaves him immediately because she knows he's seen her. In some versions of the legend, he's repelled because what he sees when he peeps through the window is that she's still beautiful to the waist, but from the waist down, she's a fish. She's a mermaid. And he's so horrified by this that the marriage ends. And for the rest of her life, she can't go back to the man she loves. She can't live in his world anymore. And it seemed to me to be, the way I wanted to use it, was a kind of a metaphor for the difficulty that even perfectly suited people have, men and women have, in coming together and making what the alchemists would call for Melusina, the chemical wedding, the absolute conjunction of what are actually opposites. And all of my books are about, in some ways, the difficulty that women have in living in a world of men. And in the book, I say that Elizabeth is telling this story to her children, and she says, for women in a man's world, it's hard on the feet. Melusina cannot walk because fundamentally she has a tail. In a sense, Melusina stands for the alien feeling that women sometimes experience in a man's world.